Have you ever heard of the great battles of Baldwin IV, the Leper King, such as Montgisard and Marjayun? But what about the silent attacks, fought far from the eyes of the world, on the arid slopes of the Dead Sea? This video will take you to a lesser-known but vital setting of Baldwin's reign, the defense of the eastern front of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. While Saladin consolidated power in Egypt and launched increasingly ambitious campaigns against the Crusader states, Baldwin could not allow any breaches in his defensive lines. The Dead Sea, with its hostile terrain and ruthless climate, seemed like a natural barrier, but was, in fact, a vulnerable corridor for Muslim incursions coming from Karak and Shorbak, Ayyubid fortresses in Transjordan. In this video, you will discover how small detachments of knights, Turcopoles and warrior monks from the Hospitallers and Templars operated in this forgotten theater. Stay with us until the end and discover a hidden side of the Christian struggle in the East, where the desert dust concealed ambushes, bravery, and decisions that shaped the kingdom's survival. In the 12th century, the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was a fragile entity, surrounded by rising Muslim powers. Founded after the First Crusade, the kingdom controlled territories sacred to Christianity, but relied on unstable alliances, European reinforcements, and military orders to survive. Baldwin ascended the throne amidst this volatile scenario, facing not only the growing threat of Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, but also internal divisions among Crusader nobles. The eastern front of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was a land of contradictions, both inhospitable and strategic. Bound by the Jordan River and the western shores of the Dead Sea, this stretch of territory seemed too natural to be threatened. But the danger came from the other side of the Muslim fortresses of Karak and Shorbak, built by the Ayyubids on the high plateaus of Transjordan. From there, small Muslim forces launched lightning raids against outposts and pilgrims, in a war of attrition that rarely made it into the chronicler's records, but constantly undermined the kingdom's stability. During Baldwin's reign, these threats intensified. Between the years of 1177 and 1180, after the humiliating Muslim defeat at Montgisard, Saladin turned his focus to strengthening his eastern roots. His strategy included infiltrating mobile forces through the gorges of Moab and the routes along the Dead Sea, attempting to destabilize Christian villages and garrisons in the Jordan Valley. Baldwin, ever watchful, responded with admirable military intelligence, and often in a preemptive manner. One of these lesser-known actions took place in the vicinity of the ford of Bethabara, where the Jordan River becomes crossable. Accounts such as those of William of Tyre suggest that the king ordered the construction of small fortified posts and watchtowers in the region, operated by Turcopoles, light local knights, generally of Syrian or Armenian origin. These soldiers were agile and adapted to the dry terrain, specialists in ambushes and skirmishes. Baldwin's goal was clear: to prevent enemy troops from easily crossing the river's vulnerable points and spreading across the plains of Jericho or along the pilgrimage routes toward Jerusalem. The presence of the Hospitallers and Templars was essential. The former, with their fortresses in eastern territory such as Baldwin, controlled the plateaus north of the Dead Sea, watching over invasion routes. The Templars operated further south in coordination with garrisons from the Castle of Montreal. These units engaged in various localized skirmishes with Muslim forces, small confrontations involving 20, 30, or 50 knights on each side, clashing for hours or days in arid and isolated regions. These battles did not leave behind great names, but they prevented Christian caravans from being looted, villages from being destroyed, and, above all, kept Saladin from having complete freedom of movement. A particularly symbolic episode occurred around the year 1179, when a Muslim column attempted to cross the Jordan toward Jericho. Alerted by his scouts, Baldwin sent a combined force of Templars and Turcopoles to intercept them on the slopes near the cave of Qumran. The battle was brief but decisive. With arrows fired from hills and swift charges by light cavalry, the Crusaders forced the enemy to retreat, leaving behind dozens of bodies and abandoned supplies. Even though such skirmishes were smaller than the great clashes of armies, they had a profound psychological and tactical impact. The skirmishes on the Eastern Front were not merely defensive acts. They represented a clear demonstration that the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, though surrounded and weakened, still knew how to act with military intelligence. Baldwin understood that to ensure the kingdom's survival, more than grand victories were needed. It was necessary to keep the enemies under constant watch, draining their resources, discouraging invasion attempts, and demonstrating readiness on all fronts. The victory of the Templars and Turcopoles on the slopes of Qumran had an immediate effect. Saladin, though lord of vast territories, saw that the eastern route remained too dangerous for a prolonged campaign. This forced the Sultan to reorganize his offensives, focusing on routes further north where Christian control was more fragmented. Thus, a series of small victories in the Dead Sea region delayed for a few years the inevitable total confrontation between the Ayyubids and Jerusalem. Politically, Baldwin used these successes to strengthen his position among the kingdom's nobles. In a court divided by factions, showing that the frontier was secure lent legitimacy to his rule, even more remarkable considering his physical limitations. The leprosy advanced, but his strategic sense remained intact. According to William of Tyre, he described the king as someone more watchful than many healthy men, a clear reference to his command capability, even while ill. Internally, the successes on the front also strengthened the relationship between the crown and the military orders. The Templars, with their headquarters in the Temple of Solomon, saw in Baldwin a trustworthy ally. The Hospitallers, who controlled vast stretches of land and operated as a force almost parallel to the royal army, benefited from continuous cooperation with the king. This balance between royal authority and decentralized military power was delicate, and each successful skirmish helped maintain that fragile harmony. From a spiritual perspective, the defenses on the Eastern Front also held significant symbolism. The territories between the Jordan River and the Dead Sea were not only militarily relevant, they were sacred lands, linked to the baptism of Christ and central biblical episodes. Defending that region was therefore more than a strategic action. It was a religious mission. The Crusader knights who fought there felt they were literally protecting the Holy Land. Baldwin, always aware of the religious dimension of his reign, made use of this sentiment in his official communications and in public ceremonies in Jerusalem. Despite continuous efforts, it was clear that Muslim pressure only increased. With Saladin growing stronger and Baldwin's health declining, maintaining the defensive pace became increasingly challenging. Even so, the legacy of those skirmishes would remain. They created a model of decentralized resistance based on mobile garrisons, field intelligence, and loyalty to a king who, even as a leper, continued to fight. Years later, when Baldwin had already passed away and Saladin marched toward Jerusalem, some of the city's last defenders were precisely veterans of those forgotten eastern campaigns. Men who had learned in the deserts near the Dead Sea to resist even when all seemed lost. Thus, the battles fought among the dry stones and the salty winds of the eastern frontier were not in vain. They delayed the enemy's advance, strengthened internal alliances, and gave the kingdom time to breathe, as one chronicler would say, the time that Providence chose to grant the holy city before its temporary fall. Great battles make history, but it is in silent skirmishes, in the daily acts of resistance, that a kingdom survives. The defensive actions along the Dead Sea during Baldwin's reign reveal a less glamorous yet profoundly heroic side of the Christian struggle in the Holy Land. There, far from Jerusalem's halls and the consecrated battlefields, the leper king raised an invisible wall with strategy, faith, and courage. Even in illness, Baldwin was a master of containment. He recognized the value of vigilance, of difficult terrain, of the loyalty of simple men, local knights, warrior monks, and discreet scouts. His leadership in these small campaigns contributed decisively to keeping Jerusalem standing longer. Today, when we recall Baldwin's name, we must also honor these forgotten episodes, the desert vigils, the alerts on the hills, the ambushes that saved lives and faith. Because in the end, history is made as much of great victories as of silent resistances. If you enjoyed this content, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more incredible stories like this one, with faith, honor, and memory. See you next time.